Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at a truly chilling cold case from 1990 out of New Jersey. It took 36 agonizing years, an intersecting crime in a completely different state, and a massive technological leap to finally solve. This isn't just your standard forensic science story. It's a profound look at how a killer's own secondary actions can unknowingly seal their fate, literally decades after they thought they'd gotten away with murder. Now, what's genuinely terrifying here is that we have a killer who meticulously tried to erase his tracks, leaving a family waiting decades for answers. The perpetrator was horrifyingly thorough, going to extreme lengths to ensure absolutely no trace of himself was left behind at the crime scene. But here's the catch. Despite all that careful planning, he made a microscopic, invisible mistake. The only problem? It would literally take the world 36 years to invent the technology needed to actually decode it. Let's map out how this rapidly unfolding tragedy in the fall of 1990 suddenly just stopped. Went completely cold. On June 23rd, our victim vanishes from her home. It isn't until months later, in October, that a hunter makes a grim discovery out in the woods near the Delaware River. By November 7th, the autopsy confirms everyone's worst fear. It's a homicide, and the victim suffered blunt force trauma to her left cheekbone. And from there, the timeline just freezes. For decades. So, picture this, Highland Lakes, New Jersey. It's a serene, safe, lakeside community where folks routinely left their windows open on warm summer nights. This is where 27-year-old bank employee Lusa Maria McBride lived alone in a small house on Glen Road. She felt completely safe. She was entirely unaware that on the night she went out to a local pub with friends, someone was waiting for her in the dark. When Lisa's family and colleagues came looking for her, they didn't just find an empty house. They found a meticulously pre-planned trap. The telephone wires outside, cut right near the foundation. A rear window screen had been intentionally slit, and the window was propped open with a log so it wouldn't trigger the front door alarm. Inside, the bed sheets, the blankets, the pillows, they were entirely missing. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It was a killer meticulously removing biological evidence. Investigators actually zeroed in on a primary suspect almost immediately, Robert William McCaffrey Jr. He was a recently discharged Navy veteran living just 13 miles away. Police established he likely knew Lisa from doing transactions at her bank. They interviewed him, looked into his military discharge, which included a psychological diagnosis, the whole shebang. But, having a name and having the physical evidence to charge someone, those are two very different things. Without a direct witness or his DNA in a system, he walked free. The senselessness of this crime is absolutely staggering. Jump to 1995, McCaffrey is still a free man, but he just can't keep quiet. He actually confesses directly to an acquaintance that he killed Lisa McBride simply because she refused to go out on a date with him. She rejected him, and he decided that was unacceptable. He even admitted he tried to go back to her house on Glen Road days after the murder to retrieve something he was terrified would connect him to the crime. Now, the true tragedy behind that confession really comes down to one number, 24. That incredibly direct, motive-revealing confession sat completely dormant for 24 years. The person who heard it, they never went to the police. It wasn't until 2019, when the Sussex County Prosecutor's Office reopened the case and a detective finally interviewed this associate, that the truth was officially put on the record. Okay, so by 1996, McCaffrey had moved out of state to South Carolina to build a new life, completely untracked. He gets married, moves on, leaves New Jersey in the rearview mirror. Which leaves us asking a massive question. If he's living freely in another state, flying completely under the radar, what on earth finally forced his DNA into the FBI's CODIS database? Well, the answer lies in a shocking second event in 2012 that dragged McCaffrey right back into the spotlight. On March 18th of that year, his wife, Marjorie Gail McCaffrey, vanishes without a single trace from their home in Charleston, South Carolina. There were no signs of her packing up and leaving voluntarily. This sparks a massive 17-member task force investigation, bringing in the FBI, and guess who the primary suspect is? Once again, Robert McCaffrey. But here's the thing. Because they couldn't find Gail's body, they couldn't charge him with her murder. However, in 2014, he gets arrested for obstructing the investigation into her disappearance. And that right there was the unintended catalyst. That specific obstruction arrest triggered a mandatory DNA entry into the national CODIS system. For the very first time, the prime suspect from a 1990 New Jersey cold case finally had his biological profile logged in a national database. But even with his DNA in the system, investigators hit a massive scientific bottleneck. See, back in 1990, the biological evidence collected from Lisa's headboard was a mixture of male and female DNA. The tech back then, and even through the 2010s, just couldn't cleanly separate the killer's profile from the victim's. It was a jumbled puzzle, so it failed the strict standards needed to run a comparison in CODIS. It wasn't until 2022 that modern genotyping technology advanced enough to finally perfectly isolate a killer's male DNA from a mixed sample. To actually break this case, investigators had to make an agonizing decision in 2022. To use this new tech, they had to exhume Lisa McBride's remains. They absolutely needed a completely pure, separate sample of her DNA so the lab could essentially subtract it from that mixed crime scene sample. They had to clear away the noise, leaving only the pure, unmixed DNA of her attacker. And it took until early 2026 for the science to catch up and do its job. On February 27, 2026, the results came back. That newly isolated male DNA from the 1990 scene was run through CODIS and, boom, it triggered a perfect match. It matched the profile McCaffrey had to surrender during his 2014 arrest. The system finally worked, connecting a 36-year-old crime scene to the exact guy police had suspected from day one. So, on April 10, 2026, that 36-year wait abruptly came to an end. A multi-state task force pulled over McCaffrey's vehicle in Manteo, North Carolina. This guy had actually been released from prison in 2023 for that obstruction charge and was just living out his life freely in the Outer Banks. But not anymore. He was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and second-degree burglary, fully reflecting the absolute nightmare he orchestrated back in June of 1990. But, even with the arrest, this investigation isn't totally closed. Police executed a search warrant on his North Carolina home, grabbing firearms and other evidence, but they are still hunting for a few very specific items. They're looking for Lisa's black wallet, her New Jersey driver's license, and a very distinct brass keychain engraved with the word Weeza. Investigators strongly believe McCaffrey took these that night, keeping them as sick, twisted trophies of his crime. Now let's shift gears a bit. Moving away from the mechanics of the investigation itself, this tragic 36-year saga leaves us with 3 highly actionable, practical safety lessons. These are crucial takeaways that you and I can apply to our everyday lives, starting right now. First up, exterior home safety. The scary reality is that attackers often prepare from the outside, long before you even pull into your driveway. McCaffrey was out there cutting wires and slitting screens in the dark. Today, we have inexpensive security cameras that can monitor the blind spots at the back of our homes. Check those areas, secure your rear windows, and please, never assume a locked front door is your only line of defense. Second, there's a huge lesson here about community responsibility. An acquaintance literally knew in 1995 that McCaffrey had killed Lisa, yet they kept quiet for 24 years. Listen, if you ever hear a confession, even if the person sounds unhinged or like they're just bragging, reporting it is absolutely vital. By speaking up, you aren't passing judgment. You are simply giving the justice system a chance to work. Your voice might literally be the only thing standing between a killer walking free and a grieving family getting some peace. And third, we have to recognize both the power and the limits of DNA databases. CODIS is incredible, but it only catches killers when states actually mandate and enforce profile submissions for convictions. McCaffrey got caught purely because South Carolina had an obstruction charge that required a DNA swab. As citizens, you have the right to advocate for this. Ensure your local representatives are strictly enforcing these DNA submission laws, because it's the invisible web that catches people who think they've slipped away forever. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to acknowledge the lingering shadow over this victory. Yes, McCaffrey is awaiting trial for Lisa, but his wife, Marjorie Gale McCaffrey, she is still missing. Her body has never been found, and without it, or without someone coming forward, he hasn't been charged with her disappearance. It really leaves us to wonder how many other tragedies, how many other cold cases out there are just waiting right now for someone, somewhere, to finally speak up.